Swanson here at Kenchtel. Fabulous for Stewart. I really wanted to get this video made before I left to make it in my room, much like the Nixon was. Nixon video that here I am, Bush 41st president. So we're going to go 38 to the slides, the presidents of the Cold War era, and we're actually going to arrive at the end of the Cold War era today. Tomorrow, one more class on presidents, and it'll be presidents of the modern era. Questions. My personal opinion is that these are the two best episodes in the entire series. Obviously, it gets into I got the best bars possible. Connection was unstable. I don't know if we lost time there about that earns you bonus points you'll be studying along the way. So all of that said, hold your sneezes till the end of class, if you please. Let's get started with Gerald Ford, our 38th president. He assumed office after the resignation of President Nixon. Nixon, the only person to this day to ever resign the U.S. presidency, and his vice president steps into office on that day. Of course, that is what a vice president. However, I have that logo bouncing across the bottom of your screen because I think that's something that's just relevant, something that you're going to go forward. So this is our 38th president of the United States. Now, something really interesting about Gerald, but hey, he is one of our Cold War era presidents. I don't want to just leave him out. So I'll point out this. He was appointed, not elected, vice president following the resignation of Nixon's first vice president. That's Spiro Agnew. Nixon's whole administration maybe had some moral, ethical issues. Actually, I did not mention this in Friday. His first name is Richard, common free-boiled and controversial. He surrounds himself vice president, and then, of course, he elected president. And that makes him the only person to never be elected VP or P. So he held the nation's highest office without ever having been elected to it. And of course, he had the chance for re-election, but he was not. Now, I want to give you a little bit more about his life, just because he's a man who was a president. So a little bit more about him. He attended the University of Michigan. University of Michigan. He was a football player. He played center, linebacker, and long snapper on the football team, and he is actually a two-time national champion. Michigan Wolverines had undefeated seasons in 1932 and 1933, and Gerald Ford was on those teams. So one more little tidbit for you. His biological father left the family when Ford was 3 years old. So, young child, some trauma. His father leaves the family, and it was his mother. And at that time, his last name was not Ford. It was his mother's second husband, named Gerald Ford, who adopted the young future president and gave him a new name. So I just give you some life in there. Sometimes it doesn't matter how you start, it matters how you finish. And this young boy who certainly had some trauma in his childhood or some circumstances that maybe he could have just waved the white flag and quit on. He didn't. Doesn't matter how you start, it matters how you finish. Gerald Ford, our 38th president of the United States. So I am now on Jimmy Carter, Plains, Georgia's own Jimmy Carter. He is a peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia, our 39th president of the United States. So you know what this slide looks like. This is what we call the baseball card info. We'll be writing this under Jimmy Carter's name. So we pointed out he's a peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia. He actually lives there to this day. If you drive past Plains, you're going to see a sign that says home of 39th president of the United States, Jimmy Carter. Obviously, they deserve to be proud of that. What we're going to talk about is the Camp David Accords, the 1979 Iranian hostage crisis. And then, you know, for all the West Pointers I've pointed out in United States history, I have to point out that Jimmy Carter was a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. But to that, I have to say, beat Navy. Actually, he became the 5th consecutive president with prior Navy service, World War II era Navy service. And it won't even stop there. Reagan will become the 6th, and then George H.W. Bush will be the 7th consecutive president with Navy service, World War II era Navy service. So kudos to the Navy for that. I got to tip my hat to the Navy for having 7 consecutive presidents in that regard. Background of him personally: graduated from Plains High School in 1941. He attended Georgia Southwestern College in Americus. Immediately after that, I'm going to look at the only president to come from the state of Georgia. While at Americus at Georgia Southwestern, he was there for 1 year. He transferred to the Georgia Institute of Technology to study mathematics in order to qualify for the Naval Academy. So he did not go to the academy straight out of high school. He actually went to 2 more schools in order to kind of boost his personal academics, his grades, his GPA, that he kept trying and eventually is accepted to the Naval Academy. 1943, he receives that appointment to the academy. He becomes a member of the class of 1947. Well, because of the wartime, World War II at that time, even though he was the 6th, so he does graduate the academy a little early in that regard. With distinction, he earns his commission. He is an ensign. That's the rank. That's the first rank in the Navy. What does he do in the Navy? Or nickname for that is a bubblehead. Because if you're in a submarine, it's kind of like you're being around a bubble. You're a bubblehead. He didn't work on just regular submarines either. He worked on nuclear submarines. He was a part of the brand new nuclear sub. Of note, just a very interesting side extra about Jimmy Carter. There's an incident that occurs in Ottawa. Campbell has a nuclear waste issue, and Jimmy Carter is selected to lead a team to clean up that nuclear waste, and that even includes going inside a nuclear reactor cell, and he and his teammates, one at a time. They can only be there for 90 seconds at a time, and they did this repeatedly. What they were doing was trying to unscrew some bolts and take the nuclear cell out of the reactor area. Very courageous, very brave men. 90 seconds was assessed to be the maximum amount of time that they could be there and still have positive for radiation up to 6 months later. You might say his urine was glowing with radiation, and he really has health effects issues with from that incident for the rest of his life. So he's a brave man going into a nuclear meltdown, and he cleans up this nuclear reactor site just because of his expertise on nuclear subs. So definitely wasn't just doing average jobs. He was doing pretty important jobs while in the Navy. He leaves the Navy. He's honorably discharged in 1953. So that's his naval career. Moving on to the next screen here that says peanut farmer elected 39th president. And that is precisely how Jimmy Carter wanted you to think of him. He was a common man. He was a peanut farmer. I mean, the picture here, he is running for president, and he is still in his fields just harvesting his peanut crop. So because of that, he kind of took on that everyman attitude. One of his television ads in 1976, he emphasized that everyman image while describing his hope for the country. And he says this quote, you got to think where the country had just come from, recent president and the government overall. And Carter described as your dream. So Jimmy Carter, the everyman, with that quote right there. A new precedent. We've talked a lot about precedents, and Jimmy Carter's walk has become an informal custom ever since he did it. Walk for over a mile on the route from the Capitol to the White House. Now, today, this is something that all presidents have modeled and mimicked ever since. But at the time, it was very revolutionary, very unheard of for the president to get out of the limo and walk on the streets amongst the people. So to the delight of thousands, President Carter and his family got out of their bulletproof limousine and they walked from Capitol Hill to the White House. It was him, his wife, Rosalind, and their 9-year-old daughter, Amy, and they were just walking amongst the people. And we've talked plenty about open top limousines, and obviously that is designed to protect the president, but with security and all sorts of safety measures in place, I'm sure. He stepped out of the limousine, and the first picture you see there, the first two screens I think you see there, are Jimmy Carter walking amongst the people, certainly amongst his security, but waving to Americans who the president sent. See, this is his walk was seen as an attempt to get away from the pageantry of the office, working men and women. Which was very we walked into a room. The pictures here, and you will see every president and their family since walking along the streets en route to the Capitol. So, and then super notably, the Bidens do it, of course, masked, with masks on their face amidst COVID concerns. So, precedent-setting move by Jimmy Carter, which is something that is still happening to this day. All right, let's get to the Camp David Accords. You will see that in 1978, this is an agreement between Israel and Egypt. Got to put those two countries in our brains. I mean, that is literally who it's between, Israel and Egypt. You might say, how is this a part of U.S. history? Well, these accords were hosted by President Carter. And then what was the purpose of the accords? It was to get Egypt to agree to recognize Israel as a nation. Super significant that a Muslim country would recognize the homeland of the Jewish people. So this is why it is so significant. The next two pictures here, you're going to see Jimmy Carter facilitating handshakes between the Egyptian president, Anwar Sadat, and the Israeli prime minister. And is really truly unheard of for this Egyptian nation, a powerful Muslim Arab nation, and Israel, relatively newly founded state and homeland of the Jewish people, to come into agreement with each other. They've been in conflict with each other. There's disputed territory. Shots have been fired. There'd been a 6-day war. So this is really, truly revolutionary. Camp David Accords themselves was a series of agreements signed by Egypt and Israel following nearly 2 weeks of secret negotiations at Camp David. That's where it gets its name. And you might wonder what Camp David is. I'm going to tell you about that in just a second. Camp David is actually the retreat, the personal retreat for the President of the United States. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a second. Ultimate goal of the Camp David Accords was to establish a framework for peace in the Middle East. Wouldn't that be nice? Peace in the Middle East, by formalizing the Arab recognition of Israel's right to exist and developing a procedure to withdraw Israeli troops from the disputed occupied territories on the West Bank. So that was like the actual nitty-gritty of the Accords. And of course, I've already said the significance was that a Muslim country would recognize the Israel's right to exist. Next slide you'll see is what is Camp David, and you'll see a couple pictures, different angles, aerial view of Camp David itself. Camp David is the retreat, the country retreat for the President of the United States. It's located in Maryland, about 62 miles northwest of Washington, D.C. It is closed to the public, but for the president and his family and any guests that he may invite, it includes a main house, cabins, a swimming pool, a putting green, riding trails, and a skeet shooting range. It was first used by President Eisenhower, and he commuted it. I should take that back. It wasn't first used by President Eisenhower. Eisenhower, however, was the first to commute there by helicopter. So very often, the president will get on what is known as Marine One, the presidential helicopter, and take a ride to Camp David. And it is named after President Eisenhower's grandson, David. So what a nice grandpa, naming this presidential retreat center after his grandson, David. That final picture you see there, that is David Eisenhower, for whom the camp is named. Kind of rounding out the Camp David Accords here. So these negotiations were held. Not necessarily want the rest of the Arab world to know that they were in negotiations with Israel, And so that's why it was very of utmost importance that secrecy be maintained, and that's why it was hosted at Camp David. You might also think about how getting a little bit away from the pressure of the boardroom, suits and ties, cameras. Everyone's expecting an agreement to be hammered out. Like if it was public knowledge, the world would be watching, the media would be watching. But just kind of at this peaceful place in nature, these gentlemen could just relax, have conversations as humans, go out for a walk. I'm sure they had good food made for them. And there's a kind of a personal diplomacy. Jimmy Carter demonstrated a personal diplomacy in order to get these accords signed and get this agreement signed. Very significant that an Arab country recognizes Israel's right to exist, and it does help solve tensions and the occupation of various disputed territories. So I want you to really go back and look at those handshake pictures, truly earth-shattering enemies, mortal enemies, once upon a time enemies, shaking hands and smiling. And you want to know if a smile is genuine? Look at the creases of the eyes. When there's creases in the eyes, that's how you can tell a smile is genuine and not faked. And when I look at this picture, I see that these gentlemen, all three of them, are smiling genuinely. And, there's just true joy that this agreement was decided upon. This is the Camp David Accord. So a big victory for Carter. He may have won re-election based on this alone. But, let me ask you this question. So do you think that there is peace in the Middle East based off of the Camp David Accords? And, no. We know the rest of history. We know that this did not achieve any type of a lasting peace in the Middle East. And it's going to spell trouble for President Carter, who's riding high at the time. Yay for the Camp David Accords. Well, now he has to deal with the Iranian hostage crisis. So a couple years later, 1979, Carter makes a very controversial decision, and in fact, kind of against the advice of his staff and his inner circle closest advisors. He allows the Iranian Shah to come into the United States for medical treatment. Now, what is a Shah? First of all, you're looking at a picture of this man. This is the Shah. Well, the Shah had been exiled from Iran. He's the former leader exiled from Iran for being too pro-West. He was in favor of democracy and capitalism. Obviously, that means we like him. But in Iran, they did not. They wanted a more radical theocracy that holds to Islamic law, and they were not in favor of the Shah being pro-West. So he had been exiled from Iran. He is in need of a life-saving medical treatment, and the best doctors in the world for this particular treatment would be in the United States. President Carter allows the Shah to come to the United States. Well, the new, more radical, more anti-American government in Iran did not approve of this. And because of this, the American embassy in Tehran, which is the capital city of Iran, the American embassy is stormed by a group of militants, many of them students. They're armed, they have weapons. The embassy is stormed, overtaken, and over 60 Americans are taken hostage inside of the American embassy, and they end up being held as hostages for 444 days. Well, 1979, of course, rolls into 1980. That is an election year. So this is going to be a hot button election issue. For every day that Americans are held in captivity in Iran, that is a day that President Carter is not looking very strong, powerful, put together, not looking like the leader that Americans want. What does Carter do to try to address the situation? Well, Carter imposes some economic sanctions against Iran. Okay, money, right? That's one of the simplest things you can do is freeze assets, close banks, economic sanctions against Iran. Largely seen as a do-nothing measure. Additionally, the military does execute a failed rescue mission called Desert One. There's a big history to Desert One. There's just multiple errors made along the way. People do die, so it's not a laughing matter at all. Helicopters crash in the middle of the desert at a refueling point. And the mission is scrapped. So this actually leads to the rise of American Special Forces, U.S. Army Special Forces, because we see a need for its surgical tactical strike force after the many errors that were made in the Desert One mission. So it's about as much time as I have to talk about Desert One. It's not one of our class standards, but the military bumbles through a failed rescue mission. As the leader of the military, commander-in-chief, the president bears the blame for that one. So Carter's efforts are largely seen as either do-nothing or ineffective. And because, as such, the Iranian hostage crisis likely cost him any chance at re-election in 1980. The country is not willing to re-elect this man who can't solve this hostage crisis on the other side of the world. As a bit of an insult to injury, the hostages are released on Inauguration Day. right as President Reagan is inaugurated, the terrorists in Tehran, they released these 60 hostages. That is the 444th day. And it's almost as if to say, we know President Reagan is going to deal with us more harshly. So we're just going to release the hostages now. And it was a bit of an insult to President Carter, the fact that they released them on that day where the change in presidential leadership happened. Couple pictures here that you can scroll on through. You can see the American flag is being burned. That is on the gate, or that's on the wall of the American embassy. You see Americans with their hands behind their head, or eyes, a drape over their eyes. This is not the position you expect to see Americans in on the world stage. Americans are supposed to be powerful, not taken captive. And then 444 days later, you see Americans coming off of an airplane, arriving back on American soil. I can only imagine how that must have felt. I bet some of them kissed the ground, happy to be back in America. Final picture you see here with a fella holding up a gold, almost looks like a credit card. Upon their return, all of these individuals were awarded a card by Major League Baseball. I think it's called the MLB Gold Card, and they can get into any baseball game ever, regular season, playoffs, World Series, just by showing their card. So, so there's I think the slide here has a hyperlink on it, and there's an article about this individual kind of reconnecting with his family through baseball. So kind of a cool extension of gratitude by Major League Baseball. And for this man in particular, he was able to come on back to me now. All right, I saw my connection was unstable, so I'm just going to finish off by saying that I was telling you about Argo, starring Ben Affleck, and it is a true story of a daring escape out of Tehran in 1979. Moves me right along to Ronald Reagan, and I happen to be wearing my... The irony of this is I was not born in 84, as old as 1984, but here it is for this class. I'm wearing my Reagan Bush t-shirt. For Ronald Reagan, we're going to talk about Reaganomics, Ronald Reagan's take on the economy and the end of the Cold War. Here's where I'm at on the slides, Ronald Reagan. So first, you got to look at a couple pictures here of Ronald Reagan. And if you were to take a guess as to his former career, that's right, he's a movie star. He was a dreamboat. Just individuals. Well, we certainly talked about how television changed the role of campaigning, and you may be able to guess that a good-looking actor, well-spoken at delivering lines and having dialogue, he is going to excel in politics in a second career. So his first career being on the silver screen, and you can see he was in some A-list movies, Casablanca right there in the middle. But in his second life, in a second career, he is going to excel in politics based on his acting background. So here we have the next picture you see here. This is Reagan and Carter facing off in their one single debate of the 1980 election cycle. One time. They only had one face-to-face on television debate. You may think back to 2016, 2020, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I think they had a series of 4, 5, maybe even 6 Reagan meet just one time for a debate. So it's a pretty important debate, right? This is going to be the one lasting impression that voters have of these individuals in this made-for-TV spectacle, spectator sport. That's what television did to presidential debate. That last impression that voters are going to have of the candidates. Of course, Carter has been bumbling along in the Iranian hostage crisis. Every single day the hostages are in captivity is just a day that's not good for him and for his presidency. So the picture you see here, and I know that there's a hyperlink in the video as well. I'll put it on Google Classroom as well at that. The question that gets asked in this clip is about Medicare. Okay, so President Carter first, and President Carter just launched low energy, monotone type of response. And Governor Reagan chimes in, or really butts in, and says, "There you go again, Mr. President." And it was just a perfectly delivered punchline, kind of to embody the fact that Carter is he's heady, he's academic, he talks, but he doesn't accomplish anything. Days as an actor. He knew how to deliver the line. He knew when to unstable again. Connection is back from being. He knew when to deliver the line, he knew how to deliver the line, and this leads to his rise in politics. He, of course, is going to capitalize on television on many other occasions as well. Let's talk about Reaganomics. Reaganomics was Ronald Reagan's plan for the economy. It focused on reducing government regulations. President Reagan believed, this is radical, President Reagan believed that if Americans had more money to spend, the economy would improve. If you have money to spend, you do spend it. So that means businesses make money. That means businesses can then return that to a lower priced goods. And that means people can buy the goods again. Economy, right? Crazy. If people have more money to spend, the economy will improve. So scroll to the next slide. What is Reaganomics? I hope you see the word reduce 3 times. You should focus on Reaganomics being centered on reducing government spending, reducing taxes, and reducing government regulations. Less involvement in your life. Reagan believed the government should be less involved in your life. You make decisions on how to spend your money, and the economy will follow with success. High interest rates and tax cuts, and then trickle down benefits for all. Trickle down, move to the next screen where you see the wine goblet. Trickle down economics becomes the nickname for his strategy. The idea is that tax benefits would favor the wealthy. So there's going to be tax cuts at the top of the tax bracket, but the benefits will trickle down like that pyramid of wine glasses. The benefits will trickle down to everyone. When the benefits trickle down, there'll be lower cost to produce goods, lower prices for those goods. Those in the lower class will spend less money on the goods because they're cheaper to begin with, and everyone benefits. So ideally, that wine bottle is filling up the top goblet, which represents the upper class, the upper bracket of the tax income. So, but as that goblet is filled up, the benefits will trickle down to everyone else. Move on to the next screen, and you can see that corporations get tax breaks, but that flows down to workers, businesses, and production. That leads to increased income and more spending. How we're told it works is what I've described. But criticism will be that what actually happens is only the top goblet gets filled. There's tax breaks at the top. The rich get richer. The criticism is that trickle-down economics or Reaganomics doesn't actually work. And then finally, the fourth political cartoon there just shows that the champagne glass fills up the top tier, one glass, and then the second tier below that, and just never makes it to the bottom of the income bracket like it was designed to do. So good in theory, didn't quite work in practice. That's kind of the lasting legacy of it. Do I think that Ronald Reagan genuinely wanted to help the lower classes? Absolutely. In practice, it does seem to hold that only the upper classes benefited from Reaganomics. So the legacy of Reaganomics is that in general, the United States experienced a sustained period of economic growth during that time period. However, federal deficit also increased dramatically, and that means the government was spending money it didn't have, which is going to lead to economic problems in the 90s. And you might say that whereas Ronald Reagan benefited from advertising Reaganomics' predecessor, or rather his successor, who's going to be George H.W. Bush. Let's make a comparison now between economic philosophies. Johnson Great Society or program, pay taxes, programs get built from the taxes. The government is involved in people's lives through those programs. Johnson's Great Society expands government involvement in people's lives. Reaganomics reduces the role of government in people's lives. Tax breaks, let the economy balance itself, less regulation, reduce, just like I described. So in comparison, two totally different philosophies, neither of them perfect, neither of them evil. I don't think either president was trying to harm the country. How did they both work out? History has decided, history has weighed in on them both. So there's a pretty fair comparison between two different presidents and their different economic philosophies. Talk briefly about the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it actually happens in 1991, which is not during Reagan's presidency. That is during Bush's presidency. But it is Ronald Reagan set the conditions for the collapse of the Soviet Union. So you definitely got to give him credit, even though it didn't actually happen during his presidency. video, or the screen that says Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall. There's a hyperlink there for a video. I'll put that on Google Classroom as well. Please take some time to watch this video. My battle buddy or co-teacher can cue that up in class. This is a very iconic speech. President Reagan delivers it from the western side of the Berlin Wall. However, within earshot of East Germany, on the other side of the wall, the East Germans, obviously with microphones and audio, and they're close enough to the eastern side of the wall that people can just hear what the speech is, what is being said in the speech. And he says powerfully, emphatically, obviously he knows the world is watching, all the cameras are on him. He says, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And shortly thereafter, that Berlin Wall will come down. If you move on to the next slide that says President Reagan and former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, they're visiting Reagan's ranch in California in 1992. So this is after either of them have been president of their countries. And what I see there, obviously see that they're both wearing cowboy hats. Seems like President Reagan has given a cowboy hat to Mikhail Gorbachev. But what I see there is two old friends kind of reminiscing. Maybe they were nemesis. Maybe it's linked that a while. I'm not quite sure if they could trust each other or not. But after their time in office and after a little bit of time and space to see the results of the breakup of the Soviet Union, I see that these two men appear to be cordial and friendly with each other, maybe reminiscing about what had happened and how the Soviet Union broke. Between Reagan and Gorbachev was very important, and it goes to this picture as well. Years on down the line, they're still compadres, and they're kind of reminiscing in photograph. Gorbachev set up policies allowing free speech, freedom of the press, and other reforms. Very revolutionary inside of the iron-fisted Soviet Union. And so Gorbachev was a foundational leader in that regard. These gentlemen reached a nuclear arms agreement. They're going to reduce the number of nuclear arms. They're going to stop producing. Tensions were high. And then additionally, this is brought on by Eastern European states rebelling against their longtime oppressors. Soviet Union had been a collective ever since World War II. And many of these states did not want to be a part of that Soviet Union. They wanted to establish their own democratic states. And when we say Soviet Union, we don't mean the word countries that have their own borders, have their own boundaries, but they were still inside the collective of the Soviet Union. Just a perfect example, one of those is Ukraine. Boundaries, but with Soviet heritage. And then that rebels against. And in a twist of events here, we have the events of the current day of Ukraine saying it has always belonged to us in the first place. So perfect example of what we could possibly, of what we can talk about history happening right in front of us as well. I like the picture there, the old Soviet Union sickle and hammer just kind of fading away. And this is the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then the more tan-looking picture there, that is Mikhail Gorbachev with his iconic bald head. He is staring at a crumbled sickle and hammer, which is the logo of the Soviet Union. All right, let's get to George H.W. Bush, and this will be our last president for this class. Right on your baseball card that he is a World War II veteran. He was in office during the fall of the Berlin Wall. He was president during Desert Storm War, Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, or sometimes called the Gulf War in 1991. He is the father of President George W. Bush, and he is husband to the iconic first ship. Prior to his presidency, George H.W. Bush, and there is a distinction in the Bushes. The first one, he's president number 41, and he has two middle names, George H.W. Bush, and then president number 43 is George Walker Bush, George W. Bush. So that's the presidency. George H.W. Bush served in the Navy. This is the 7th Navy veteran in a row. President Reagan is also a Navy veteran. Bombing missions against the Japanese during World War II. This island was very for communication. All right, I think my connection is back. So on this particular island, the Japanese used it for communications. It had a radio tower on it, and George H.W. Bush's mission was to bomb this radio tower. His aircraft, which is known as an Avenger, during this bombing mission was hit with anti-aircraft fire. Now, before he's going to make a crash landing into the ocean. His aircraft's engines are on fire, but George Bush, as the pilot, he has the wherewithal, he has the mental awareness to release his bombs on the target, the radio tower, and he does successfully destroy his target. So I think that's a pretty cool mark of his character, that even amidst the fire on the engines, right, literally your life is burning, he still releases the bombs and hits the target like he needs to. His plane goes into the ocean, and 2 of his crew members are killed in the attack. He only has 2 crew members. They're both killed in the attack. He survives the crash landing, and actually he carries that with him for the rest of his life. Later in life, he has many interviews where he reflects on the 2 gentlemen that lost their lives on that day, and he says that everything he's done has been to try to make their sacrifice worthwhile. He got to live and they didn't, and he wanted to live in a way that made their lives or their sacrifice worthwhile. So he never let go of, he never forgot the people who were with him on that day. A couple pictures you see there, he actually names his airplane the Barbara, and he actually he went through several airplanes. This is Barbara 3. And then the picture with the arrow, I'm pretty sure there's a hyperlink to a video there as well. The picture with the arrow is him being pulled out of the ocean by a rescue submarine. He actually was in an inflatable raft for about 4 hours. And knowing that the Navy, knowing that planes were shot down during this mission, they sent out some submarines to try to look for survivors. And he is rescued by a submarine. And there is video footage of this young man, this 21-year-old Navy pilot, being pulled out of the water. And who would know that it would be the future president, George H.W. Bush. So when I watch that video, I'm always struck and amazed that nobody knew that this 21-year-old would live a life that would lead to the White House. Of course, they were just rescuing anyone. They would rescue anyone who's an American. But we have literal video footage of the president of the United States, the future president of the United States, being pulled out of the ocean, his life being saved. The next picture you see is the fall of the Berlin Wall. On November 9th, 1989, as the Cold War began to thaw, across Eastern Europe, the East Germany and the East Berlin Communist Party announced a change in the relations with the West. Starting at midnight on that day, he said that citizens of East Germany were free to cross the country's border. This was it, November 9th, 1989. This is the end of division, East and West Germany, East and West Berlin. So the picture you see there is soldiers tearing down sections of the wall. And I am struck by the expressions on either side of the wall. The soldiers, they're in their drab uniforms. I'm looking at the picture here on my phone. They're in drab uniforms. Take a second to just kind of think about their facial expressions. And it's almost, what do you think is going through his head? He's almost like, why did we fight them for so long? Or I wonder what we've been missing out in the West. You see the spray paint. The spray paint is on the western side of the wall, because on the west side of the wall, they could come right up to the wall. And there were many messages of hope, peace, greetings to family members who might be in the east, spray painted on that side of the wall, the western side of the wall, almost like graffiti, because on the western side of the wall, you could come right up to it. On the eastern side of the wall, there's actually a 100-yard kill zone, barbed wire, and should anyone try to be sneaking across the eastern side of the wall, the wall is actually blood spattered and bullet marked, because people would be shot on the eastern side of the wall. So a marked difference on the 2 sides of the wall. There is a hyperlink video for this as well, and I would encourage you, those of you in class, to watch it, because you're going to see some real primary source footage of the wall coming down. And more importantly than that, interviews of people expressing their messages of hope for the future, because this is the fall of the Berlin Wall. The next picture you see is Mason and Selah staring at a piece of the Berlin Wall, very graffitied piece. You see the word vision there. This is actually at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library, a place we've been able to visit. And I'm always struck by, I remember exactly what Mason said in that moment, looking at this piece of wall. And she looked at me and she said, "David, what's that?" And I love that my kids didn't know. Of course, I told them the story, I told them the history, but the point is they didn't know a wall that divided people from each other. They didn't grow up in a lifetime. They didn't grow up in a world that has a wall that divided free from communists. So the fact that my kids, and you, quite frankly, you haven't grown up in a world like this either. The fact that you don't know this to be true on the world stage is awesome, is special. I'm glad that it's history. I'm glad that it's only history that we teach you about. And of course, I hope that you will live in a way, you will lead in a way that the world never repeats something like having a Berlin Wall dividing a city. Finally, the handshake, that's a super iconic photo. The American flag, the Soviet Union flag, just like President Trump taking a step across the 38th parallel. This was unprecedented in the decades before. No other U.S. president would have been shaking hands with the Soviet premier. So President George H.W. Bush shaking hands and ending the Cold War. There it is. Next picture you see there is George Bush and his wife Barbara, and they're waving at troops in Saudi Arabia. These troops would eventually be deployed into Kuwait in what is known as the Desert Storm or the Gulf War. Now, I'm a little sad that the Gulf War isn't a larger part of our standards, and we're not going to have more time to talk about it, but I'm going to give you this much real quick. 1990, and then in January of 1991 is when the war actually kicked off. Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, invaded his neighboring country, Kuwait. Kuwait was an oil-rich country. Kuwait had access to the water. Port city is always important. And Saddam Hussein wanted its oil fields and its port access. So Kuwait is smaller, weaker, and Saddam Hussein invades that country and enslaves its people, right? That's simply put, is he invades the country and takes it over. Starts oppressing its people. You can't do that, right? We don't stand for that. You can't invade your neighbors. So President George H.W. Bush postures U.S. troops first in Saudi Arabia. That's at a staging base. And then eventually these American forces and coalition forces, because there were other countries from around the world, liberate Kuwait. The war started on January 17th, 1991. And I always remember that because that is my birthday. That is my third birthday. The air war started on January 17th. Air war lasted for about a month, and the ground war began on February 23rd and ended on February 28th. It is very often called a 100-hour war. So you got to think about the significance of a 100-hour war, ground war, 43 days total war, from air campaign to the end of the ground war, 43 days, only 100 hours on the ground, though, because what so many people remembered was the Vietnam War. What so many people remember was being embroiled in a 20-year-long, seems like it's never going to end, unsuccessful war. This is what many people have a memory of. So the Gulf War and Gulf War veterans were received back home like the champions that they are to a ticker tape parade in New York City. General Norman Schwarzkopf walks down New York City streets with confetti coming from the sky from the skyscrapers above them. Very iconic moment. And it's almost like the nation was expressing decades of gratitude to troops